Let's take a look at international news now. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has selected 7 House members to serve as impeachment managers in the upcoming Senate trial of President Donald Trump, including Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam B. Schiff and Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler. The House voted on a resolution that will trigger the transmission of the articles of impeachment to Senate. Meanwhile, Democrats in the United States House of Representatives are to include new evidence in formal impeachment charges against President Donald Trump. The charges are to be sent to the Senate later today, and senior Democrats said they would include phone records and other documents provided by Florida businessman Lev Parnas. The charges claim that Trump abused his power by pressuring Ukraine to investigate a political rival, Democratic former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, correspondent to the UN and the US, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, joins us now in studio. Nice to finally have you here, sitting next to you face-to-face, Sherwin.
I thought you were going to say nice to meet you.
No. We've met many a times over the screen, I know, but a pleasure, certainly. I mean, it's been a very long year for you with lots going on. I can imagine must be enough to make your head spin, and still there are more developments today. We spoke about the fact that 7 representatives have been chosen. The Democrats played it very close to their chest in terms of who are going to be those representatives. But what does all of this mean, Sherwin, in terms of what happens next Tuesday?
It's the next step. It's a piece that we've all been waiting for. Essentially, as I described it earlier today, it's the bridge between the House of Representatives and the Senate. So we've been waiting for these impeachment managers to be appointed, so essentially that they can walk over the bridge into the Senate, where they will prosecute the charges, the 2 articles of impeachment, which you touched on now: abuse of power as it relates to that Ukraine call with the president of Ukraine between himself and President Donald Trump, and the pressure that was exerted on Ukrainian officials, including, as we are now hearing in the new documents that are coming out today, the prosecutor of Ukraine, the so-called corrupt prosecutor that wanted the anti-corruption hawk, the then United States ambassador to Ukraine, to be removed at the request of Rudy Giuliani, the personal attorney of the president sitting in the White House. So abuse of power, and then in addition to that, the obstruction of Congress. When this inquiry started, the White House and officials in the White House, in the executive, refused to honor the subpoenas that were issued to them by in terms of the law, the subpoenas of Congress. So 2 articles of impeachment, and so this is now the bridge. The impeachment managers will go to the Senate. They now become prosecutors. And who do you have leading that prosecutorial charge? Adam Schiff, who was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is essentially chairing the impeachment inquiry, then sent over the documentation, the evidence that they had garnered in that process, to Gerald Nadler, the congressman from New York, who chairs the Judiciary Committee and was responsible for authoring the articles of impeachment that we now have. Those are going to be the attack dogs. The other people, they'll divide up the labor in terms of how they lay this out in terms of the 7. But these are the 2 faces of the impeachment.
So,
in addition
let's
to Nancy
talk about
Pelosi.
whether or not this will be a successful attack. I mean, there are those who are very doubtful of whether or not this will result in the removal of Donald Trump. What will the options be should they fail to? He's been impeached, but should he be failed to?
So, what is the definition of success in this? Is the question, right? Is it about the House upholding their constitutional mandate to hold this president to account if he violated the Constitution? As Nancy Pelosi will always say, in fact, with her right hand raised, that we all take this oath to the Constitution. Are we fulfilling our constitutional mandate if the president is abusing power, if he is undermining our foreign policy by requesting a foreign president, a foreign entity, to essentially interfere in the 2020 election? Given the not so distant history of what happened in 2016, where the Mueller report and subsequent investigations have revealed Russian interference in the 2016 election. So they are upholding the Constitution, is the first point that Nancy Pelosi will make. The second part is, will senators in the Republican Party do the same? Is it incumbent on them also, that lawmakers who have similarly taken an oath of office, to now have a fair process? They will be sworn in by the Chief Justice in the Senate trial. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, will preside over this process. He will swear them in, and they will take an oath in this trial to render impartial justice. But we've heard Democratic senators who will also be jurors on the Elizabeth Warren on the campaign trail, Kamala Harris, who's now stepped away, Cory Booker as a senator. They believe that there is a case to answer from this president. Are they going to be impartial? Is Mitch McConnell going to be impartial in this process? He's talked about coordinating with the White House. He's called for a speedy trial so that they can dismiss the entire thing. So we've got this partisan divide. Is anybody going to be impartial? That's the oath they will have to take. Whether they live up to that or not, it remains to be seen.
So, Sherwin, all of this happens in parallel with the elections. You mentioned earlier on that the primaries are coming up. And speaking of the Democrats, what kind of men and women would fight the Donald Trump campaign? And is it diverse? Is it representative of the people of the U.S.?
The question is, and I imagine that this is how they'll respond to it themselves if this was posed to them, is do we want to fight him on his own turf, or are we above and beyond that? Do we want to set a different tone? Is this the America or the United States that we want to represent in our tone? Are we going to tweet like the president? I don't think anyone can tweet like President Donald Trump. He is unique in this way, and he has a very loyal set of supporters. So there are 46% have been very loyal. That levy is not going to break. What about the other 60%, the other 55%? Is that a tone that they would embrace? So we have to also understand we have many independent voters in this country. We have many disaffected Democratic voters in this country that didn't vote for this president. 63 million voted for Hillary Clinton, 60 voted for Donald Trump. So there was a 3 million surplus on the Hillary Clinton side. But then you have this other objective, this other obstacle called the Electoral College, this opaque system where you have to win enough states to cobble together the 270 votes you need to win the election. That's what they need to focus on. And where did Hillary Clinton go wrong? In those Midwestern states of Wisconsin, those white-collar, blue-collar states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio. If they can cobble together a coalition in those parts like Obama did, they will win the election.
So, Sherwin, as if you didn't have enough on your plate, you're also our UN correspondent. Let's talk about that. A very important milestone for the UN, 75 years of existence. But it's faced a lot of criticism, and the fact that it's still based on US soil. I'm curious, what does that mean for not only reform? We've seen the events in regards to Iran. Seems to be rather toothless in pushing its influence.
Yeah, where it's based sort of comes to the fore in terms of where, the U.S. reluctance to issue visas on time, but there is a host country agreement with the United States that compels the United States to honor the independence of the United Nations. When you are on UN soil, you are on UN property, you can't have federal agents or New York NYPD storming the building. That's UN property. So that's probably a more complex discussion, a more long-term discussion of where we move. I know China's offered to host the UN, but do you just pick up and leave, and what do they do with that big building, right? Well, maybe Bloomberg will buy it. The other aspect of your question is the effectiveness of the UN. Without the reform that so many democratic countries in Africa seek, the majority of the world seek African permanent representation. If you have a protagonist in a conflict like we saw in Iran, the drone strike on the head of the Quds force in Iran, if you have that in Iraq, if you have that strike, is it then not incumbent on a permanent member of the council that has that veto to recuse themselves, right, from that process, this organ that is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security? Is it time for the United States, if they are not seen any longer as an honest broker vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, to recuse themselves from that process so that you can have an impartial jurisdiction on how that process unfolds? The same can be said about Russia as it relates to Syria. The same might be said about China as it relates to the crisis in Myanmar and the millions of Rohingya refugees that are in Bangladesh. Is it time for this council to be reformed so that if 14 members of a 15-member body says this is what we need to do, then surely democracy rules the day. But that cannot happen on the Iran-US battle because the United States has a veto.
But Sherwin, very quickly, it is a question of the Pied Piper. Who pays the Pied Piper? At this point in our historical trajectory in terms of global geopolitics, is there anybody who has a large enough purse to fund the UN to be effective?
Now you've asked me a tough question. Where's the money going to come from, right? We have the same issues on funding the SDGs, on the mitigation we need, and the money in the Green Climate Fund for climate change mitigation. I don't know. Are they? Right. Maybe the Chinese. The Chinese and the Japanese have upped their contributions to the United Nations. So have some of the European powers. But the United States is the richest country by far in the world. Do they perhaps have a moral responsibility to still pay and shut up?
Well, we'll see if those tectonic plates shift. Thanks a lot, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our correspondent to the United Nations and the US, in the studio with us.